we are on a higher side with respect to our logistic cost. But we are putting in efforts to reduce our logistic cost. So what is government exactly doing? So government on one side is focusing on the national logistics policy. Probably will not be so good at digitalization and coming up with online social media brand building. So if India really wants to establish as a brand, we can call it as India as a brand abroad. So when somebody thinks about Indian product, there should be something that is appealing to them. So probably this 360-degree approach where the government looks in rectifying some of these issues through appropriate coordination between center and state probably will bring some solution to these problems. But along with that, probably students should also gather some information related to the recent schemes so that he can quote them in the way forward. So that would be my advice with respect to manufacturing as a topic for exam. I am always very much optimistic when it comes to India. I just say be part of India's growth story and you can change everything possible across the globe. So India is one such nation where I'm looking at a very proper growth prospects.
Hello and welcome everyone. In a special session today, we have lined up a discussion on India as a global manufacturing hub with a renowned faculty member, Ram Sir. Welcome Ram Sir.
Hello Nitish.
Sir, before we jump on to the discussion, I just want you to briefly establish why this topic, India as a global manufacturing hub, is important.
Yes, Nitish. In fact, manufacturing is one such sector which India has been trying to do a lot of things. And what we observe is from the second 5-year plan, if we try to understand the growth of the manufacturing sector. So India, which started as a capital intensive growth, which was driven by public sector enterprises, we wanted to bring a lot of change in manufacturing. So why is it that we were so keen with respect to manufacturing in 1960s, if we try to understand? So we believed that industry would be something which will drive the growth of Indian economy, like many other countries. But at the same time, the progress was very little. So I call it as muted manufacturing. So when I use this word muted manufacturing, it is nothing but manufacturing contribution to GDP is very, very less. For example, even today we are contributing to around 17% of our GDP. And even in 1990s, we were around 14.5, 15. So even after 20 years after liberalization, the manufacturing contribution to GDP is not increasing as expected. And one more important observation is, even today, 45% of the population is still dependent on our primary sector. And we term it as labor dualism. So what I mean by labor dualism is, that is, labor is still dependent on that sector which is giving them less income. So ideally, there should have been occupational transition. That is, labor should have been shifted from our primary sector to the secondary sector. But because of policies or because we could not implement effectively, so still labor is stuck with the primary sector. Okay, so today, India is known for its demography. And we are trying to reap dividend from its demography, which we have the young population. But that depends on how we develop our manufacturing sector. Whether there will be demographic dividend or disaster will be decided by our manufacturing sector. And that is the reason manufacturing is very important in the present day.
Now that we have briefly established that manufacturing is very important, so in your opinion, how far we have progressed in this domain?
Yes, Nitish. In fact, after 1990, that is to be very specific, our Industrial Policy Resolution 1991. So we focused on several aspects. I'll just name a few. For example, we have come up with deregulation. That is, government has reduced its interference. Okay. And then delicensing. That is, the number of licenses required for setting up industries have been considerably reduced. And we also came up with disinvestments and privatization. So we wanted to bring in efficiency with respect to our manufacturing sector. And we also came up with associated reforms in 1999-2000, which I call them as the second generation reforms. So for any country to progress, these second generation reforms, which I call it as, for example, the labor sector reforms or the reforms with respect to technology and taxing, also becomes very important, which acts as a backbone. So over a period of time, we have been putting an effort in terms of bringing in changes. And now our target is, how can we make India a global manufacturing hub? So can India really integrate with respect to the global value chain? So is it that what is the role of India, or can India really do that is the question. So I think that is what, so progress wise, yes, we are doing it, But at the same time, can India integrate with the global value chain is what we'll try to introspect in our discussion.
So what I understood, sir, that domestically we are doing well, we are on the right path, but to really achieve that potential that we have to integrate ourselves in the global value chain.
Yes.
Okay. Sir, why do we consider that India has the potential to become a global manufacturing hub? What are the drivers which indicate this?
Yes, Nitish. So if we try to observe India today, we have one of the youngest workforce. So that is one advantage which we have. Second is, for any manufacturing industry to survive or for India to become a global manufacturing hub, we need to focus on four important aspects. The first thing is the policies of the government, which will make other countries to come up and set their industries in India. So this we have done pretty well. I'll just quote one data. For example, when we talk about the production linked incentive program, which is launched by the government. So before launching the PLI scheme, so our mobile imports, if we try to tally, were around something like around 1.6 to 2 billion. Okay, so now we have considerably reduced our imports and our exports are accounting to almost like 11 billion. So this considerable change we can account to the policies of the government, that is the PLI scheme. Okay, the second important aspect is you need a very good infrastructure. It is not just about your producing a product. The product has to go to the final customer, or I call it as the last mile delivery, for which you need a very good infrastructure, a proper road port connectivity, etc. So that can be measured through the logistic performance index, which is given by the World Bank. Now we see a very good improvement even in the logistic performance index. For example, we can see our rank has improved from almost 54 to 38. Okay, so 54 in 2014, and we are doing considerably well. Another important aspect is our logistics performance, or the logistics policy of the government primarily talks about reducing our logistic cost to almost 8% of GDP by 2030. So India is around somewhere around 14 to 18% on an average. Of course, recently it was less. It was 9% and that was in news, but on an average, we are on a higher side with respect to our logistic cost. But we are putting in efforts to reduce our logistic cost. So what is government exactly doing? So government on one side is focusing on the national logistics policy. Along with that, we have also come up with national infrastructure pipeline. So where in 2020 to 2025, government decided to spend almost like 111 lakh crores. And monetization pipeline is another policy. Government said we will raise by monetizing our existing assets. So government already has ports, airports. It wants to rent them, lease them out, and get money out of it and build new greenfield infrastructure. So I think government is doing all this. And then government also has come up with the Gati Shakti program, where you're trying to build a single uniform platform so that the decision making will be faster and will not waste taxpayers' money. There should be coordination among different ministries. So we are working from the four fronts. Okay, so and infrastructure wise, yes, we have done a considerable, we have moved a considerable way. That is what we can observe as far as infrastructure, thanks to government's capital investment in the budgets as well. Third important aspect is, which India is lacking, which I feel is, whenever a company sets up its manufacturing industry, it expects a cheap and quality labor force. So the problem here is we have labor force available, we have the young population, but our education system is not making blue collar jobs who have a lot of precision basically in terms of bringing in value. So this is one disadvantage. Probably we should focus on our new education policy, or maybe the vocational training, or we talk about several skill development programs which the government has come up with. Okay, so all these will try to enhance the third area. Next, the fourth important area is building that industry ecosystem. So what is the meaning of industry ecosystem is, for example, we are manufacturing a car. So we are into manufacturing parts, we are into assembling, we are also into R&D. So there is a industry hub that has developed for the car manufacturing. Such industry hubs have to develop if we want to really excel and become a global manufacturing hub. So in these four areas, India has to work on.
Sir, in the earlier question, you mentioned some of the government initiatives. With regard to government initiatives or policies, is there any other particular policy or any other overall framework which the government has done which you would like to mention?
Actually, there are several policies brought in by the government. So we can't call it as one single policy. For example, we can talk about the Make in India program, which the government has launched long back. Along with that, government has come up with skill development programs, a separate ministry on skill development as well. Government has also come up with Atmanirbhar Bharat packages and specifically focusing on micro, small and medium enterprises. I want to add one point with respect to micro, small and medium enterprises. So when we talk about MSMEs, from the beginning, India was giving a lot of incentives to MSMEs. So there are two things here. MSMEs actually contribute to almost like 40% of our exports. And MSMEs are also labor intensive. So when I say labor intensive, with just 20% of investment, I can create 80% of the jobs. So we started focusing on MSMEs, but most of the MSMEs turned out to become dwarfs. So what is the problem? What is this dwarf MSME? Dwarf MSME is an MSME where it is there in the market for 10 years, but it does not have even 100 permanent employees. So that is one big challenge again. That means, is my manufacturing able to create jobs? So this is one area again where we decided to focus and Atmanirbhar Bharat packages to MSME. Another problem is most of our manufacturing is in the informal sector. So that is another problem which we are. So when most of the industry is in the informal sector, we will have challenges like economies of scale. Probably we will not be so good at digitalization and coming up with online social media brand building. So if India really wants to establish as a brand, we can call it as India as a brand abroad. So when somebody thinks about Indian product, there should be something that is appealing to them. So this can be done provided these programs like formalization or maybe government specific programs on indigenous and value addition. So where government is putting in efforts. So for example, we are talking about specific programs for formalization of MSMEs as well. So all these are programs. So it's a culmination of many programs which government is putting in. So whether it is the PLI scheme to address manufacturing within the country, or whether it is the Make in India, or whether it is the skill development programs, Atmanirbhar Bharat packages, or when we talk about the credit guarantee schemes which are launched for MSMEs as well. So all these together have to work on. So only then probably we'll be reaching where we have to.
Sir, briefly, you have already mentioned that most of these schemes have been launched, but they have not come to fruition. They have not given the desired results. In your opinion, what are the structural constraints which are hindering the desired result that we want to achieve?
See, any scheme, what I believe is, will take at least 4 to 5 years to validate. So if I have to talk about GST, so taxing is also very important for my manufacturing to do well. So because of higher taxes and cascading effect with respect to our taxing policy, my product is ultimately going to become costly in the market. The same applies when it comes to transit costs. Okay, so when it is a skewed transportation system where we use mostly road transport, etc. So that is also increasing the cost of manufacturing. Okay, so when we talk about policies, there are several issues. For example, one is there should be appropriate coordination between center and state. So most of the policies, if they have to be really successful, there should be appropriate coordination between center and state. Why? Because when I talk about land acquisition or labor related issues, so state also plays an important role. So that is one area where India has to work on. Second is when we are trying to motivate the foreign investors to invest. So we are talking about labor sector reforms. So Rajasthan is one such state which has come up with drastic reforms with respect to liberalizing labor laws. But it has to be done uniformly. Then another important aspect is doing business index. So India is doing well, but there are only few states where the doing business ranking or there is less friction with respect to implementation. So there should be coordination in these areas so that the investors will look at India as a whole and make investments across. So one more important problem is when I look at Northeast or North, most of the special economic zones are coming up in South or the Western part of the country. But when I look at the demographic dividend, so demographic dividend, you can reap the benefits of demographic dividend from the North and the Northeast. So probably the infrastructure and the system should be built in such a way where these special economic zones develop across India. So the problem is there is a sectoral bias on one side where service industry, most of the investment is coming in or SEZs are developing. There is also a regional bias where the money is only moving either to the southern part or the western part. So probably this 360-degree approach where the government looks in rectifying some of these issues through appropriate coordination between center and state probably will bring some solution to these problems.
Sir, you mentioned 360-degree approach. I want you to elaborate a little on it. What will it entail? What is the 360-degree approach?
See, when I say a 360-degree approach, so it involves several policies being implemented effectively. So, for example, when I talk about taxes, so taxing is one area. So, if I really want to implement my taxing system has to be made really efficient. Of course, one reform is one nation, one tax. We have come up with GST. But still, there are some lacunae and issues when it comes to the systems related to IGST. This is one area where government as can work on even now. Okay, so that is basically the framework with respect to the taxing part. Second important aspect is implementation of the labor laws. Okay, or liberalizing labor laws. When I say liberalizing labor laws is one aspect where we can bring in a change still. Okay, so still it is not effective or not implemented uniformly across India. Third important aspect is talking about informal or informalization, especially with respect to micro, small, and medium enterprises. So, when they are working in segments and when there is no economies of scale, India as a brand, we cannot expand our production base. Another important aspect is, are we really focusing on manufacturing or are we getting satisfied with only assembling? So when I say 360 degrees, I will not just be satisfied with assembling. So is India becoming an assembling hub? Are we just assembling mobile phones? Or maybe are we thinking about R&D and becoming a manufacturing hub? So when I talk about Atmanirbharata, so how can India become Atmanirbhar is something very important. So this Atmanirbharata is completely different from the import substitution which we followed in 60s. So we have to focus on our strengths first. So one of the strengths which we have is demography. We have to reap the benefits of our demography. One other strength which we have is maybe a vast coastline. Probably take the benefits of maybe the wind energy, or we have a tropical climate. Why can't we take the benefit of the solar energy? And we can never be dependent on other countries with respect to critical technologies. For example, US has denied GPS technology during Kargil war. So anything can happen anytime in future. So if we can work on our strengths, whether it is with respect to health, education, infrastructure, or whether it is with respect to our production capabilities or developing our domestic industries, including MSME, probably over a period of time, our dependence on other countries is automatically going to reduce and the real Atmanirbharata is definitely going to be established. And one more important observation, Nitish, today only India is one such country where you can see there is a growth prospect, which is not there in most of the countries abroad. Japan is in trouble. European countries are in trouble. They are facing recession. There is a discussion going on that Europe, even the US markets are going to collapse. So there's a lot of discussion that the markets are not okay in US also. There can be a recession. And India is one such country where there is a considerable amount of optimism, which can make investors to look towards India. So today, all the producers are also looking at China plus one policy. So what is this China plus one? China is something like the only entity where most of the production is going on right now. Can I have one more alternative, any other alternative other than China? Because if I completely depend on China, tomorrow when there was COVID, there was zero COVID policy. So most of the companies were making losses. And China is also facing problems, of their prices falling down, the manufacturing units not doing well, or we can say deflationary issues in China. So can India be that one other alternative which can bring this production to production base? We need not shift the production base. These countries are looking for an alternate base. It is just that India should become an alternative, and that's going to build our manufacturing story. So that China plus one, that one should be India. And that will help us in Atmanirbharata on one side, and that will help us in creating more jobs on the other side. And that comes I can call it as a true freedom for India.
Sir, final comments. How optimistic are you of India becoming a global manufacturing hub?
Yeah, I am always very much optimistic when it comes to India. I just say be part of India's growth story and you can change everything possible across the globe. So India is one such nation where I'm looking at a very proper growth prospects. But at the same time, I have to work on my internal structures. And then nobody can stop India. So India is the nation where there is optimism. And every one of us will be part of India's growth story. Whoever is part of India's growth story is going to develop along with India. The same framework, I think investors will think, the manufacturers will be thinking, and everybody probably, even I think tomorrow there will be people coming to India for working in our manufacturing companies. So that is what I feel at this moment.
Great. Thank you, sir. It was a very enriching discussion. Any final word of advice or any final comment for our students?
One final advice could be, I can tell that manufacturing is a very important topic. Every year there are questions in UPSC. So don't neglect manufacturing as a sector. And I also tell students to collect data related to manufacturing, especially between 1994-95 to 2004-5, which basically talks about impact of new economic reforms on manufacturing. So this data will also help you, in fact, to write better answers in mains. Because there are many questions like over tertiarization of Indian economy has led to jobless growth, or did economic reforms did really benefit manufacturing sector. So I need some old data, new data anyhow you know. So better would be collect some data related to 94-95 to 2004-5, investments, contribution to GDP, these kind of things. But along with that, probably students should also gather some information related to the recent schemes, so that he can quote them in the way forward. So that would be my advice with respect to manufacturing as a topic for exam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nitish.
Students, I hope that this was a very enriching discussion for you also. Stay updated, stay curious. Up till next time, thank you.